my pals. How are you? We've got an amazing page today. We'll just give people a few minutes to find the show. Who's going to be first? Who's going to be first to write where they're tuning in from? It's so important. Comment immediately. Tell us where you're tuning in from to signal to Facebook something of value is happening right here. It's Adrian Smith. Adrian Smith of Columbia Falls, Montana is first. Who's going to be next? Who's in the house? Brit Tikkun Olam Emmanuel. What a beautiful handle on Facebook. Shalom from Minnesota. Lawrence is in the house from Queens, New York. What other states? What other countries? Hello, Leslie Ann Landsberg. Great to see you here in the house from Texas. Patricia Lynn from freezing Kansas. We were in Manhattan today visiting Columbia University, and it was cold. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't quite as bad as our visit yesterday. Ivan Bauman, Vegas, baby. Beautiful, beautiful. That's it. Signal to Facebook. Something good happening here so more people get a chance to learn with us. Diane Monholon Walker says Bellevue, Idaho, in the house. Fantastic to see you all with us today. We are in chapter 3 of the first tractate of the Talmud, Berachos. We've been studying conditions which create an impediment to reciting the daily Shema. For example, a dead body, right? If we're in the presence of a corpse, either because we are the mourner, we've lost a loved one and the body hasn't been buried yet, or we're attending a funeral and there's going to be a body there that hasn't been buried yet, or we're in a cemetery where there's lots of dead people around, or we've been acting as a guard over a dead body overnight. How does this affect our ability to say the Shema, and what do we learn from that? That is where we have been. And today we're going to go to a very interesting place by the way of the honor of the Chachamim, the honor of the sages, right? And we're going to learn that you have to take the honor of a Torah scholar very seriously. Why is the honor of a Torah scholar so important? Because this is a person who spends his whole life honoring God, right? So a person who studies God's word, who engages full time, as it were, or much of his time or her time, learning the will of the Lord, learning what God says in Scripture. So that's a person we want to take, special care to honor that person. Why? Because a person who honors God is a person that we should honor. In fact, this is a teaching of the sages in chapters of the Fathers in Pirkei Avos. Who is honored? One who honors others. One who honors God gets even a little extra honor, right? Aaron Bambakalerman. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm sure I'm butchering your name. Bambakladman, is that right? He says, good to see you at the CU. Great to see you there, my friend. All right, let's jump into today's page. Yesterday we ran a little long, and I want to be mindful of people's time today. It should be a little bit of a shorter show. Okay. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, one who mocks Torah scholars, one who mocks sages, after their death gets a place in Gehenna for this. So Gehenna is, equivalent perhaps to the notion in the common culture of purgatory. Hell, basically. There is no other hell in the Jewish understanding. So Gehenna is hell. It's just a little bit different than the standard, notion of what hell is, because in Judaism and Jewish wisdom, hell is a temporary place. You get purified there before you go on your way to the world of souls. Elsewhere, let's say in the world of souls. But it's bad. You do not want to go to Gehenna, and it may not be for eternity, but it's really bad and really difficult while we're there. Maybe necessary, but something to be avoided. And now he's saying that one who mocks Torah scholars after their death earns their place in Gehenna. So what is so bad about mocking a Torah scholar while they're dead? Well, you'll recall that at the end of yesterday's page, we were having an extended discussion about this idea of, do the dead know what is happening in this world, right? So if we criticize somebody or even go so far as to mock someone after they're dead, is it actually so bad? Maybe they don't even know that this is happening. And of course, from the point of view of the sages, the dead do know what's being said about them. And, a Torah scholar who's going to have perhaps an extra level of awareness because they've earned, an extra level of perspective through their studies in their life, and who should be honored while they're alive and while they're dead, it's a person you extra specially want to be careful not to criticize or mock them, especially not to mock them, right? So similarly, and now that we're talking about the honor of Torah scholars and the fact that we shouldn't mock them after they've died, now we actually are going to talk about what we say about Torah scholars when they're alive, right? So if we're not going to mock them when they've died, perhaps so much more, we're going to be careful of their honor when they're alive. And part of being careful about the honor of Torah scholars or sages, wise ones, is that if you happen to see somebody that you consider to be a Torah scholar, and they don't see that you see them, but you happen to witness them committing a sin, some kind of transgression, you know that they've done something wrong. And then later you see them, during the day you see them commit a transgression, and then that night you see them again. You just run into them. They're in your community, right? So when you see them again, you should not in your mind think, okay, that's a sinner, because they may have repented between when they committed the transgression and when you're seeing them again. And then they go even further, and Rabbi Yishmael says that if you see a Torah scholar commit a sin during the day and then you see him that night, you should assume that he has repented because you give a Torah scholar the benefit of the doubt. I love this. The idea here is that when we talk about a person who dedicates his life to learning what is God's will, we don't assume that they're never going to transgress or make mistakes or commit sins, right? They're human. They remain human even though they've done all this learning and made that effort to purify themselves. So we don't assume that they don't sin. We don't make an assumption that, well, we thought we saw them sin, but we must have been wrong. No. The assumption we make is that even though or rather because they sinned, when we see them later, we should assume that they have repented. That's what they've acquired. Not the ability to avoid all sin, but the knowledge and the strength that when they do sin, they repent, they atone, they're going to realize that they've done wrong, and they're going to really work hard not to make that mistake again and to make up for the mistake, the transgression that they did commit. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said that there were 24 cases in which somebody mocked a Torah scholar in some way, and because of it, the court imposed the punishment of ostracism against the one who mocked the Torah scholar or scholars. Ostracism is a specific thing. Excommunication means that a person did something so bad that the community kicks him out, right? So the famous case in the 1600s in Amsterdam of very learned, actually, Jewish scholar named Spinoza, who became such a heretic about Jewish ideas that his community excommunicated him. So excommunication means that no one in the community will speak to you again. You're out 100%. I know there's excommunication in other religions. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but the definition in a Jewish community of excommunication is that no one in that community will speak to you again, and it's permanent, unless somehow it gets reversed. Ostracism is less than excommunication. Ostracism is less than excommunication. Do I have that definition right here? it's just a little bit less. Ostracism is a lesser degree of excommunication. The primary laws that apply at this level of sort of minor excommunication is that the individual must conduct himself as if he is in mourning and he is not included in a prayer quorum, a minyan. And this does not preclude the individual, however, from hiring workers or hiring himself out as a laborer. And in that sense, it's business as usual. And the same is true in terms of studying and teaching Torah. On the other hand, one who does not take the necessary steps to have his ostracism lifted, if he doesn't take the necessary steps to have the ostracism lifted, is then excommunicated, right? So it's like probation. Remember the movie Animal House? It's like double secret probation, right? If you don't straighten it out, you're going to end up in excommunication. So ostracism is this minor thing where the community is, very wary of you. They're still going to have a relationship with you. There's still going to be business. They'll even learn Torah with you. But if you don't conduct yourself in such a way as to show that you know you did wrong and that whatever you did that caused the ostracism, you don't make up for it, then eventually that ostracism will become an excommunication. So Yehoshua ben Levi said that there were 24 cases of ostracism, where the court imposed ostracism on people because they mocked Torah scholars. Rabbi Elazar went and investigated. He wanted to know what the 24 cases were, and he was able to identify 3 of them. So then we learn about these 3 cases where somebody was ostracized for mocking the sages. The first one was the case of Akavia ben Mahalalel, who accused 2 rabbis of applying the same standard. Okay, so there was a case in which, in the old days, there was something called the Sota ritual, right? And that when the temple stood, so this is the case of a wife who was accused of cheating on her husband. And she would go through a certain ritual at the temple that was kind of a test that actually required a supernatural intervention if she was guilty, right? So if she was guilty, she would drink the waters of the suspected woman, and if she was guilty, it would kill her. But if she was innocent, then she would survive the ordeal. And they didn't give her poison or anything like that. She was just they dissolved certain verses from the Torah. They wrote it on a piece of paper, and then put that paper into the water and dissolved the ink in there and some dirt from the floor. And, if a regular person drank that water, nothing would happen to them. If an innocent woman drank that, nothing would happen to her. But if she was guilty of adultery, then there would be a supernatural intervention, a divine intervention, and it would kill her. What happened was the 2 rabbis were asked at that time, well, do we use the same ritual, the Sota ritual, for a woman who is Jewish by conversion? So if she's a convert, does she get the same ritual? And those 2 rabbis said, yes, she does. And this guy, Akavia ben Mahalalel, said, well, the reason that those 2 rabbis used the same standard on a convert as they would have on a woman who's born Jewish is because those 2 rabbis are converts. So he accused them of not, giving a just ruling on this question because of their personal bias, sort of saying, well, converts are going to be held to the same standard in every case, and it's almost the truth that they're the same standard in every case. There's just a few exceptions. This is not one of them. But this guy Akavia said, well, the only reason that they found this is because they themselves are converts. But in truth, a woman who's a convert should not be subject to the same ritual of the Sota as a woman who's born Jewish. Turns out that Akavia Mahalalel was wrong. The halacha does not follow Akavia. It follows those 2 rabbis who said that a woman who's a convert has the same standard applied to her as a woman who's born Jewish in the case of the Sota ritual. But because this guy Akavia accused those 2 rabbis of having their own sense of right and wrong blinded by their identity, in a sense mocking them when he should have respected their judgment, the court imposed this ostracism on him. And if you die while you're still under ostracism, it's very bad, right? Remember, when you're ostracized, you're given a chance to recant and say, okay, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that about the sages. I'm sorry. And then they'll remove the ostracism. But if you don't recant, then you remain in that condition, and eventually you could be excommunicated. Or in the case of Akavia, the story is told, he died. If you die while you're still ostracized, so that's bad, and they want to send a message to everyone that, well, this guy didn't recant, and because he didn't recant, we want you to know, we want the public to know that the thing he said was wrong. And how do we signal that to the public? We stone his coffin, meaning they put a stone on top of his coffin after he's buried. Pretty, rough thing, rough message to impose on somebody. The idea of like, when are you stoned? That's like a very terrible punishment, to be stoned. Like that's a form of execution. And they weren't able to execute him. It wasn't even liable to execution, but they just want to signal that what he did was wrong, and he died before he recanted, so they put that stone on the coffin. But the second example that Rebbe Elazar found of somebody who was ostracized for mocking the sages, to hear that case, to relate that case to us, first we hear that Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, God forbid you should think that Akavia ben Mehalalel, who was an incredibly holy rabbi, a contemporary of Hillel, and unmatched in terms of wisdom, purity, and fear of God, God forbid you should think that he ever mocked sages or was ostracized. That story is wrong. Right? So the whole story I just told you about Akavia ben Mehalalel must have happened to someone else, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because Akavia was so pure. So Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the case was that, rather it was another rabbi, who I'm not going to name right now, and he was ostracized because he mocked the rabbinic ruling that we had to be very stringent with washing our hands. So in fact, if you're an observant Jew, you go eat in a meal that's going to have bread, and you got to wash your hands before, and there's certain other conditions when you got to wash your hands, and there's a whole bunch of rabbinically ordained laws that require hand washing at different times. And this other rabbi said, that's silly. You guys made up a law that has no basis in the Torah. You shouldn't have done that. I'm not going to wash my hands, said that rabbi. And because he was a Torah scholar, and he said all the other Torah scholars were wrong, and he wasn't going to wash his hands according to the law that they passed, they accused him of mocking Torah scholars, and he was ostracized, and he died while he was still ostracized, and they lay a stone on his coffin to indicate symbolically that he was stoned, should have been stoned, for his recalcitrance. The third example of a rabbi who mocked the scholars and should have been, the third example of somebody who earns ostracism. In fact, not for mocking other Torah scholars. Okay, in this case, the punishment is ostracism, but it's not for mocking Torah scholars. But here the punishment of ostracism was applied to, or should have been applied to, a pretty famous guy in the Talmud named Choni the Circle Maker. Okay? And in this case, the punishment of ostracism fits one who is arrogant toward heaven. Choni was a guy who was a very, very learned guy, very holy, and lived during a time when there was a terrible drought. Okay? And the drought was really hurting the children of Israel in the land of Israel. The drought was going on and on and on and on, and it wouldn't end, and people were trying to end the drought, and no one could end the drought. And along comes Choni, and he says to God, I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm not going to step out of that circle until you make it rain, because you were wrong. You shouldn't have brought this drought to the people, and it's time to make it rain. And he even imposed certain conditions on how and when it should rain to God. So he's very arrogant in the way that he spoke to heaven. And to indicate to the people that people shouldn't act that way, particularly a Torah scholar shouldn't act that way, the rabbis would have ostracized Choni the Circle Maker, but they couldn't ostracize Choni the circle maker. Can you guess why? Can you guess why? I don't have a lot of time because we're going out to a nice dinner and we don't want to be late to meet the rest of the members of our party. So I'm going to tell you. They couldn't ostracize Choni the circle maker because when he said to God, I'm not stepping out of this circle until you make it rain, and so you better make it rain and make it rain when and how I say, God did it. God did exactly what Choni demanded. And so the sort of chief rabbi at that time said, well, I would have ostracized you for arrogance in the face of heaven, except that God gave in to your demand. And what is this similar to? It's similar to a father who gives in to a petulant child. And I guess the father loves that child, and the child has so many redeeming qualities that even, when he acts so petulantly and he should be punished, sometimes the father gives in just to show that he loves the kid that much and doesn't punish the child. And that's what happened to Choni. And since God didn't punish Choni, and not only didn't punish him, but even gave him what he demanded on behalf of the people, not just for himself, so they didn't ostracize Choni the circle maker. And those are the cases that Rabbi Elazar found regarding when ostracism was imposed. We come back to our study of when we say and do not say the Shema in the presence of a corpse. And so if we have a funeral, people who have showed up at the funeral to eulogize the dead, right? So people who are close to the dead, but not mourners, meaning not family, right? This is not a relative of the deceased, so they would not be exempt from saying the Shema because of the relationship. They are exempt if they're close to the corpse, right? They're literally in the presence of the corpse. So those people, the guests at a funeral, if the time for saying the Shema has arrived, let's say the morning Shema, and it's like an early morning funeral, but it's not so late, not so early, and they haven't said Shema yet, and the time is approaching when they're going to lose the opportunity to say the morning Shema, so they should slip away, right? They can take turns so that there's enough people here to show respect to the dead, but individually, one at a time, they can slip away, say Shema, fulfill their obligation, and then come back and rejoin the party at the funeral. Unless they're sitting in such a way that in order to slip away, they would have to climb over the mourner, right? So now this is a case of human dignity. So even though it's a mitzvah to fulfill your obligation to recite the morning Shema, if you're going to cause a commotion and embarrass the mourner and make it awkward for the person, who's just lost a loved one and is like in a really serious state, then because we value human dignity so much, so now these people are excused just so they don't have to climb over the mourner at this very difficult and awkward time. The mourner, of course, does not slip away because he has this relationship with the dead and he's exempt. And in fact, while the people are slipping away, the eulogizers, the mourner is told that he should, justify God's judgment. All right, so this is kind of interesting. So they give this formula, which in a moment I'm going to tell you the formula is wrong, right? But a formula was given where while the eulogizers slip away to say Shema, the mourner stays there and says, Master of the universe, I have sinned greatly against you, and you have not collected even 1/1000th of my debt. May it be your will, Lord our God, to mercifully repair the breaches in our fence and the breaches of your nation, the house of Israel. So in essence, the mourner is saying, I have been made to suffer. I have lost a loved one. And for whatever, there may be other reasons why this person died, but the fact that I'm feeling this pain is because the fact that I've committed sins and I have brought this pain on myself. Right? It's not that this person died to punish me, but I'm feeling this pain as an appropriate punishment. This is how they were thinking then. And in fact, when I think about how many times I've made mistakes, this is only 1/1000th of the punishment that I deserve, right? And he's told to say that by some rabbis. But Abaye said, a person should not say that I've only received 1/1000th of the punishment that I deserve. Abaye says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who taught in the name of Rabbi Yosef, one should never open the mouth of Satan. Right? We don't give the prosecutor, Satan is the prosecutor, we don't give Satan a reason to go to God and say, oh, see, even he says it, he deserves more punishment. Right? So when we hear that someone has died, we say, Baruch Dayan Emet. God is the true judge. And we leave it at that. We don't say, oh, it could have been much worse. We don't say, oh, we're so lucky. I mean, the fact is, we've done terrible things. It could have been much worse for us. We don't say that. We don't mention tragedies that haven't happened. If we say something like that, that's why we always add the phrase, God forbid, right? When we talk about it, we feel like we have to say the possibility of a tragedy occurring. We add, God forbid, because and it's better not to mention such things at all, right? And this is a law. This is a halacha, not just a custom, not just folk wisdom. This is a law, right? It is inappropriate for one to say that God has not punished him enough for his sins as he thereby opens his mouth to Satan, as per the statements of Abaye and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, also known as Resh Lakish, in this Gemara that we just studied, right? So when you think that, okay, it could have been much worse, because the truth is, I've done so many things wrong in my life, I deserve to get worse than what I've gotten. You can think that, you don't say that, right? And when you hear that something as terrible has happened, you might say, well, God is... But you don't say it could have been much worse and God would have been justified in making it worse for me. My pals, that's the end of my teaching for today. I've got to run out with some family. We're going to have some dinner. And I'm sending you big love from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. We'll be traveling, so I'm not sure exactly when the show is going to be. But always great to learn Torah with you. All the best.